Happy Friday to everyone joining us for our Spotlight series today with the incredible Radha and Shantae from The Darkest Horse. We're so excited to have a conversation with you and learn more about the work that you are doing, not only in the Chicago space, but greater and beyond. So I would love to turn it over to the two of you and just start with some introductions, a little bit about you, and then tell us about The Darkest Horse, its mission, and why it's important.
Radha, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'll jump right in. First of all, thank you for having us. Really lovely way to spend a chunk of our Friday. Really happy to be here and yeah, excited for this conversation. So we're here from The Darkest Horse, which is a next-gen consultancy. And we are really focused on the intersection of four key domains. And so those domains are radical inclusion, emerging technology, the future of work, and health, well-being, and human potential. And the reason that we talk about those four is that those are really at the core of the work that we do. We're really focused on this idea of how do we leverage the direction that really work is moving in naturally, and the role that technology plays and how we show up and how we work to actually access greater radical inclusion for our teams and help a diverse set of folks really thrive. So what we say is that we partner with organizations to help them remain competitive while empowering diverse talent to thrive by embracing those emerging technologies and instituting strategies that maximize their team's human potential. And we do that by bringing identity and inclusion to the forefront in order to capture collective genius and unleash the full power of organizational and individual ability. So, the idea is that these homogenous teams will never reach the level that a team of dark horses will meet. And so we're here to help those teams take the lead. And I personally, my name is Radha Jovovich. My pronouns are she, her. And I show up in this work having been a leader in especially the healthcare and tech space for a long time. I've led teams in data science, operations, product innovation, and a few other kind of operations-oriented type roles. And when I was doing that work, it was always really important to me that my teams showed up inclusively and that I was accessing really diverse and powerful talent because I knew that that was the way to get to the best results. And so I started out just within my own teams really being deliberate about how we create that culture and how we create the kind of programs and policies and procedures to make that possible. Over my career, it then kind of expanded into my organizations, right? How do I not only bring that to the broader culture and community, but also how we show up in doing our work? So the products that we're creating, that we're delivering, the services that we bring to market, how do we make those inclusive to a broad reaching market as well? And so I was sort of doing that for my own work and then started helping other organizations, started connecting with other people. I met Shantae and we started bringing that to the world, originally through a podcast. And then as the podcast kept growing, organizations kept coming to us and saying, we need your help. We want to do what you're talking about. And so we actually pivoted into a consulting firm. So it was all very organic and natural. And it's just been growing ever since then. And now I'm going to let my very brilliant and very wonderful co-founder share sort of the side of the team that she brings, because we have a really, really beautiful kind of complementing system that we're doing here.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. My name is Shantae Thurmond, the other half of The Darkest Horse, and my pronouns are she, her, Aya. A couple of things about me that I feel like are kind of helpful to share. One, I grew up in the Midwest. I live now on the north side of the Chicagoland area with my family. I have twins, working mom, really proud of that, and also very stressed about that given all the times. I would be lying if I didn't say that, but it certainly does inform a lot of the work that we're bringing to the market and how we sort of work with organizations and aspire in any way to kind of coach individuals and leaders on how they can be like their best versions of themselves. And it would be silly of me and basically a missed opportunity if I didn't really sort of talk about one of the things that I feel is super important about my identity, and that you can all see it. I'm a woman of color, I'm Black, and I'm very proud of that. I feel like right now, I just want to say that I'm really proud to kind of be working with Radha as an ally. and having her alongside for this ride, and to really be at the right place at the right time. We've been putting in some work, and we'll get into that, but it's really a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate you giving us, a space and a forum to share who we are and what we're doing and why we care.
Excellent. And again, we are so excited to have both of you here. For our viewers out there, knowing ISTI, we work primarily in the STEM field, and especially in STEM education. Yeah. And I know in just having our initial phone call with the two of you, there's a lot of intersection that happens beyond just, oh, it's an education issue, oh, it's a equity issue, oh, it's a workforce issue. But there's a lot of vertical layers that have to have some sort of synergy in order to create this transformational change that we are on a path to working towards, and recognizing differences and celebrating that. And in that initial call to Shantae, I think it was you who said you help people understand what is perceived as weakness is actually strength. And maybe that was Rada too, so correct me if I'm wrong. And I think that really ties into the intersection of the work that you do, is who's perceiving these weaknesses, who's making hiring decisions, who's understanding what someone's skill set brings to the table when they don't necessarily see them in action until they start hiring them. And I would love to hear kind of your perception on and how that is achieved through the work that you do.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I guess one of the things I sort of forgot is that what I was doing prior to this was executive search, working, primarily with digital health and innovation companies and startups that were here locally to the Midwest, but also around the country. That's how I actually met Rada. Was I saw her resume and I was like, ooh, I definitely need to talk with Rada. And not even knowing that we had this like connection to local, kind of the places where we were living and calling home. We had lots of interconnection that we didn't even sort of pick up on until we continued to have this conversation. And maybe that's the point, that there are gatekeepers who unfortunately are working in institutions and systems and companies and startups who perhaps don't have the awareness or the appetite or the curiosity to ask what's behind a resume, finding out, who people really are and getting in and digging into their stories. There's a lot of reasons for that. Could be, for one, EEOC laws, where you have equal opportunity employment and you have affirmative action. You have issues where people are telling you on one hand not to ask specific questions about people. But I find that if you make space and you naturally are curious and you sort of are yourself, you can allow for some of that personality and some of the things that people don't necessarily want to bring to the sort of resume to seep in. And that's what happened with Rada and I, actually. We had a conversation. I noticed these different things, primarily some activism work that really sparked my interest. And if I hadn't asked, I don't think the conversation would have went the way it did. So that's, I feel like, an example of what is happening and what can happen when it comes to folks, especially in STEM, getting opportunity.
Excellent. And I would like to push a little further too in terms of the 4 domains. So understanding kind of each of those and how they play together. When the Darkest Horse was first founded, it was out of a gap, something that was lacking in the field. How did you start to tackle, or first kind of take a stab at, where does this change start?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, well, I want to say this too, that the Dark Horse sort of like this concept, right, is really around, folks who are not necessarily being paid attention to. How many times have we shown up somewhere and people maybe see us as invisible? Maybe not for all of us, we can say that, but for me, certainly I have felt that way. And I felt like I was a person that was sort of in the room running a race that nobody paid attention to. And in many ways that gave me, because they weren't paying attention to me, it gave me an opportunity to do what I needed to do in order to kind of show up. And that could be to fail. And that could be to really exceed expectation, or to almost be like a wild card. That's what a dark horse is. It's somebody that you don't expect to win, right? And I apologize if there's going to be children in the background.
They're enjoying the interview too. That's
working on life, #working parents. But really just to kind of acknowledge the fact that there's lots of folks who are underrepresented, and we wanted to put a spotlight on those folks. And so we did. We just said, what can we do? The first thing we can do, that doesn't cost a lot of money, is podcasting, because we knew that was a way to have host conversations, elevate people's profiles and brands, especially people who weren't necessarily looking for that elevation, That was sort of the fun part. And then letting people know, and it really did work. I mean, everyone that's been on our show, we feel like has benefited in that way, that they've talked to new people. People have reached out. It's not like we're hearing success stories every single day, but we know that we've been able to kind of put it out to our network and to the ether, and we've heard really positive feedback and people saying, I didn't know, and thank you so much for that thought leadership, right? So that was the first part. Right, I'm sure I forgot something. What else?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, no, everything you said is perfect. I think I would sort of highlight in there that there's this sort of piece of sort of how we show up and how we allow people to show up, right? And so when you ask about like how do we create this? How do we make this happen? How do we start making this shift? I think, excuse me, a lot of the way that Shantae and I think about it is from all angles, right? Like people ask us, to create inclusion, is that a grassroots activity, or do you need it to come from leadership? And we say yes, because the idea here is that it has to be everyone showing up together. Like, and part of the intent of the Darkest Horse podcast and a lot of the work that we do is really trying to bring both ends together, right? So it's trying to bring folks, encourage those folks to show up in their authentic selves, and encourage leaders who actually want to have the best talent. And that it turns out that the best talent, A, looks a lot of different ways, and B, has the psychological safety in your team to show up authentically. Because the amount of energy that it sucks and takes out of your ability to deliver when you're trying to assimilate or cover or like match some sort of set of expectations, that is a direct leakage of actual ability to perform, right? That takes up your kind of computing power, your access to that resource. And so you want to create a space where folks can just be allocating all of their genius to their creative work, right? And the way that the demands that you're putting on them, instead of losing all of this energy to trying to fit a mold and meet expectations of some normative version of an employee that you have. And when you create that space and you let them show up, and then you get people to like believe that they're going to be safe showing up, right? And you encourage them to start saying, hey, I actually think a little bit differently than the folks that you have, and I can bring something really powerful and important and interesting to your team. And you get both of those sides saying yes to that difference, to that variety, that diversity. Then we all get to show up, and we all get to perform, and we all get to be those dark horses that you didn't see coming, and then they win the race, right? So I really think that that's how we're trying to create this space, is really trying to say, like, it takes all of us to do this right. And it takes all of us earning trust from each other to know that we can do this together, and that we can be safe collaborating in that way.
I think that's a really interesting point. I don't think I've thought through on my own, even in terms of it's not just about being in the space. It's about being you in the space, bringing your voice to the space, and being in the space safely. And that's created from the people around you and the leaders. In terms of where you started and where you've been, have you seen improvement in these spaces? Is there still a really long way to go? Or what barriers may still exist that are important to bring to the forefront of the conversation?
Yeah. Do you want me to go first, Brad, or do you want to go? So I think we've seen improvement. I think we have lots of opportunity for change, as we see that's happening in the world right now, where I would say that, just a couple of years ago, when we just told people we were going to do diversity and inclusion, the market looked a certain way. Mm-hmm. And we saw an opportunity to kind of show up. When we say radical inclusion, we're like, gone are the days of cultural competency. Today is the day where we start to really show up as our whole full self, so that we can be the best versions of ourselves, that human potential aspect, right? So you can have health and wellness in wherever setting that you are. And that felt foreign to people, but here we are a couple of years later, and people are like so done with this system, with the institutionalized oppression and racism that has basically kept people out of opportunity. So we have seen improvement, and we feel like we are kind of people trying to cull and bring people along on that journey. But to say that we're done, we have so much more work to do, and I feel like we're just now getting started. Let's tear down the system. Let's rebuild it. And our model allows for equity, and it allows for inclusion. It allows for accessibility. It provides an opportunity for us to make sure that we are letting people have an opportunity to design something that's truly human-centered so they can actually have belonging at work. They can have belonging at school. They can have belonging in their communities, because that's really, at the end of the day, what we're looking for.
Yeah, and I think that honestly, the recent events around sort of the ways that we've had this sort of acute flare up of the chronic illness of white supremacy, racial injustice, and sort of systems of inequity and oppression really highlight both of those responses. That like it's a little bit exhausting, the ways in which it doesn't feel like maybe we've made as much progress as some folks may have felt like we have, right? And that like it really kind of weighs on us and is becoming really, really apparent, I think, to a lot of folks who maybe haven't felt like it was obvious that like we do have a lot of work to do, and like there's a long road ahead of us. And at the same time, the way that folks have been showing up for it is super encouraging. And I think especially when we look at it in terms of generations, the ways that millennials and Gen Zs have shown up and made it really clear that like they're a population that is not here for the kind of old cultural competency, like, you know, status quo type noise. Like I am super inspired by the language that I'm hearing, the like ways of organizing, the ways of connecting, and like that's radical inclusion, right? And they use technology. They are like on the cutting edge of emerging technology that like, you know, the kind of leadership of large organizations are trying to keep up with. And so when I look at sort of the direction that we are going, with these young folks who are coming into the workforce and doing awesome work, it does make me really optimistic, because I think that they were born in this situation that we're saying, hey, you guys, the future of work is coming, and for them, they're like, it's here, you know. It's been the future right now, and like we're all using these tools, and that, you know, they're in a position where they can actually be leveraging that technology savvy to be doing work and creating teams and creating organizations that are aligned with those values as well.
I like the shift, even focusing on the generational differences of who's showing up again in what capacity and how they're framing it. A lot of ISTI's work is working with high school students. And so it starts really early. And again, while we're focused, you know, somewhat on STEM education, it's also about who you can be in the workforce, finding a STEM identity. You know, if you don't have a mentor that looks like you, is it something that you aspire to be? And so being able to put those types of people in front of students who look like them, speak like them, have differences like them, and really have that aspiration and see that identity as possible. But it doesn't just end there. It can't just be an exposure piece in high school and they're all excited and then there's no internships available or they're not being selected for jobs. And so I turn that to you too, as we understand the generation that's actually in the hiring pool is not necessarily millennials or not necessarily Gen Z. What could you give to, you know, corporate levels of starting to make those changes to be inclusive in their hiring pool, to be inclusive in their workforce, and just even kind of take those first steps? What might that be?
Yeah, I think before one quick idea that was kind of embedded into your lead up to the question, which is, yes, I am so big on representation and role modeling and like visibility and being able to look up and see people who look like you. And that's honestly, like, that was an early recognition for me as a leader. I was like, I need to be obviously out as a queer woman, right? Like I needed to be clear that like you can be female, you can be queer, you can be out and explicit about that and be respected and taken seriously and thrive in a workplace and stuff like that. And so like, that was definitely a big part of, for me, making sure that I was always out and stuff in work. But I would actually add on to that it's not just about having people who look like you and saying like, oh, that makes me able to picture myself in that position. But it's looking up and saying, oh my gosh, there's so many ways to be, right? And like seeing not just one that looks like you or one that looks different, you know, and saying like, okay, these are two possibilities.
Right.
But the more that you see a spectrum, the more that you see all these variations, you not only get the opportunity to say, okay, there's no reason that even if I'm different from all of these people, there's no reason that like I couldn't be another variation.
Yeah.
And it allows you a certain potential to become something else, right? To say like, okay, the version of me that I am right now is possible. And also look at all these other things that I could be, I could self-actualize, right? Like, so folks who maybe haven't come out yet, you know, can look up and see like, oh, like, and haven't even recognized it about themselves, right? Can look up and say, oh, I could identify as a queer person and be a leader. Like, I could be gender non-conforming. I could just like open up my sense of like what's possible, and be all the intersecting identities. And like, I don't have to have a specific portrait of it, but I know that there's this whole collage of possibility. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there, that it's not just about seeing yourself there, it's about seeing possibility.
I love that phrasing, the collage of possibility.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
We'll write it down.
To Radha's point, I think so one of the things that we're doing, right, where we are super interested in like the youth, and we're interested in the folks who are the job seekers, right? But we're also dedicating our time and efforts and energy to educating. Well, I guess it's more about unlearning, helping people unlearn and relearn ways and language. And for example, showing up and being who you are, but then also making space for people who are not like you. When a lot of times, like the benefit that Rod and I have working together is that she can come in and talk to white folks differently than I can. And we are not unapologetic or shy about saying that. I can talk to people of color, specifically Black youth, about things that she can't do. And so we're better together than we are apart. And we know that. And I think that we have to kind of, we try to encourage and kind of, demonstrate that to people that we're working with. So we encourage our partners and our clients to develop leaders that are open and willing to kind of diversify their own networks, to make sure that they're expanding their strategic partnerships and coalitions, because that's what it's going to take. But also, like I said, making space, using pronouns, when, to be able to understand and appreciate intersectionality, that, there's variations of who we are. Even no two Black people are the same, no two white folks are the same, no two queer folks are the same. And the more we can make that normative versus binary, kind of assumptions of girl, boy, woman, man, Black, white, good or bad, the more we can kind of take those two and bring them apart, I think the better. And so that's sort of the things that we tend to kind of put into our training and development with leaders. And we hope to really kind of expand on that message in terms of our content as well.
Just a kind of clarifying point as it came up to a lot of the work that you did, especially within the 4 domains, is it targeted at kind of corporate level? Is it targeted at really anyone interested in having those conversations? Is there, who you want to land on in terms of an audience, or is it really who's wanting to make these changes for the betterment of their organization, their company, whatever that might be?
Radha, go ahead. I'll let Radha answer, then I'll pipe in.
Yeah. So honestly, the way that we have been working, it really shows up a lot of different ways. The ways that people find us can vary. And, sometimes it's a, woke CEO who understands and wants to start at the top and is like, and I acknowledge that I have a lot to learn myself and I want to bring expertise in, right? A lot of the time it's folks who are working in the HR department who may or may not have sort of diversity as one of the bullets on their job description, and that they, they're navigating it, and maybe they have a lot of expertise, but they recognize that some of those conversations and some of that content is easier to have done, facilitated by a sort of objective third party without the kind of dynamics of their own kind of role in the organization and stuff like that. And a lot of folks that reach out to us are employees, right? Are members of teams who don't have this as a part of their responsibility, but are passionate and want to show up and want their teammates to show up. And they start out by saying, hey, can we just like co-host an event? And that's one of the ways that we start working with a lot of organizations, is we co-host events that we like don't necessarily even charge the organization for. We like have them sort of support it in, back when we could get together in 3D space, by hosting it in their office or by supplying food and drink and things like that, just so that we can like start a conversation, and we can show up and we can start creating that dialogue in the organization. And so that can be led by any person in the team, right? Who's just like, hey, I found these folks and they want to have this conversation and they're going to bring in awesome speakers and it's going to be really helpful for us. So it really can show up all over the map in terms of who spearheads it in an organization. And our work, we do events, we do training, we do consulting services for the leadership team. We do executive coaching around how to show up as an inclusive leader. We're kind of a boutique firm that does really wraparound care in this space. And because it's really, we kind of understand all of those pieces of it. And it's with a dream client, we get to do all of it together. So it's all just like integrated. But for some folks, it's just, they want to start with some intro content and get the language going and then see how far they can carry it. And we're like huge fans of organizations taking it in-house and like owning it themselves. So I know that was kind of an all over the place answer, but it's because we sort of are able and nimble enough that we can be creative and custom for different organizations' needs.
Excellent. And Shante, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in a perfect world, we'd have all of our components of our business completed and sort of, ready for the world. And we're a startup too in that way. But, I think the longer term aspiration is to come up with these ideas where we have digital applications, virtual applications where people can actually interact. And Radha does coaching. I've done coaching. We sort of divide and conquer in that way. And so we have the framework and we have the content and we have the drive and desire. And now it's just about being able to, as a business, sustain ourselves and then be able to invest in the next gen technologies that we're so eager. For example, like virtual reality, right? Why not create an app that allows people to have access to spaces in the event of COVID or other things, right, where we can't necessarily get people together. And we're so obsessed with like equity and accessibility that we think about people who are not able to get into a room. Often that was something that we were really passionate about before. And so I think that we're going to use that to really kind of inspire some of the things that we're going to do for the Darkest Horse. So what you see now is just the beginning. We have bigger kind of longer term plans to make sure that we're showing up in different ways for people who need us.
I think it's awesome that as your organization works with others to really evolve as teams, evolve as leaders, you're doing the same thing. So it's not just, here, we'll tell you what to do, you make changes, but the way that you all work, the way that you all speak with one another and kind of think about ways to bring in more of those intersections. I think that's really cool. Just as a nimble team to be able to do. We have a team of 3 as well, or we have a team of 3. So that's our goal, is to kind of be nimble and responsive to what our teachers and our students need. And so it's great to, again, have those collaborations with groups like yours doing similar work.
Absolutely.
One of the things too we'd love to hear in terms of projects or achievements from the Darkest Horse, is there anything that you all think absolutely needs to be amplified and shared as just kind of a pillar of what you all have been working on?
Yeah, I want to brag a couple of things. One, this anti-racism work, and I want to just bring this up first because what's been happening is we've been getting lots of folks to come to us and say, "Can you help us host a courageous conversation?" And you would think that as consultants we were like, "Yes," but what happened was, and I'll be honest with you, I think it's fair and good to share here that it just became a lot. Like we're small and we wanted this work, but at the same time we had to really think carefully about what we were going to do. And so we've made a decision to show up as a true partnership and true allies of one another. Radha has been taking on a bunch of people and educating them, not only through, sending out articles and having direct conversations with the CEOs and executive leadership teams and, sort of drilling into them in ways that I'm not ready or have the capacity for right now. But So that's one piece. And then I would say that we've been really, truly hosting these virtual conversations. And Radha, again, is kind of the star at this. She actually has a virtual hosting company that started during, she was already doing all these, sort of really transformational coaching pieces. And I'll let her talk about that specifically. But it really came to light during COVID. And now it's coming to light again. So we're like, this is perfect. We organically have been growing and sort of adding little bits of these things into our business. And I really want to just say that Radha's been showing up lately and killing it as an ally. I mean, I can't even thank her enough. And I hope later she plugs something that she's doing tonight that's really cool, and a demonstration of what I'm talking about, how you can create space and make space virtually. And then the other thing is our podcast. I'm really proud of that. It's been hard to do the producing and everything, and we have another season of podcasting coming up. Maybe there's ways for us to work together, and anybody who's listening, reach out. But we're going to do podcasting, continue to do that, and we're going to change the focus a little bit and make it more topical. So I'm really proud of those two things, and I want Radha to go back to the anti-racism work if she wants to.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Shantae. Shantae is like, it's, I think one of my favorite things about this team is that like we are each other's number one fan. And if you give us 5 seconds, we'll take an hour to talk about how amazing the other one is and how thankful we are. So like get you a co-founder like that. Right. And I think, yeah, I will second, those are the two things that I would mention. And I'd say specifically for the anti-racism work, I'm really, really, really proud of how we've been showing up. And I think what Shantae's pointing to is exactly like, and you kind of mentioned it too, the way that we sort of show up doing the work ourselves, right? That we are kind of representing exactly the kind of growth and, leaning into that growth edge all the time and always working harder that we're asking other folks to do. And that what Shantae is talking about is we show up for each other, right? And we recognize the ways that each of us has resources when we do and doesn't when we don't. And we model that, and we're really transparent and explicit about that when we host these sessions. And so, we had the Monday after all the rioting and protesting and stuff like that started, we that Monday morning had a training session scheduled, coincidentally, with a large organization here in Chicago. And we were like, okay, we need to shift. We need to adapt, right? We need to be ready for like how people are going to be showing up. And we can't do what we were planning on doing, which was a sort of general inclusion 101 type training. And I think there are a lot of organizations that are still doing inclusion type training right now, which I think is a big mistake. And I would describe that as tone deaf. But instead, we immediately pivoted to say, okay, we've got some anti-racism conversation to have right now. Like we've got to pause everything and make space for how everyone is showing up, and make space for the fact that like being a Black person working in America right now is harrowing, right? It's always harrowing, and it's extra exhausting right now. And we need to like make some space and give some air to take a breath, right? And so we did that. We showed up, and right before it, Shantae was having a rough day, right? Like, I mean, we were all having rough days, but she, like, as a Black woman who is really keyed into this work and is really passionate about this work, like, it was a tough morning. And we had a conversation, and we made the agreement that like, she decided she was going to come because she wanted to be there. She wanted to show up, and she's like resilient, like you can't imagine. And I said, great, I will start the session by saying that I'm going to do a lot of the talking today, right? That as an ally, I'm going to step up, and I'm going to protect, shield, and support my beloved teammate, right? Because that's what allies do, is we say, you've got a lot right now, and I can help you. Right? I have resources. And so we show up modeling that. And we've been doing that every step of the way with the anti-racism work that we've been doing the last few weeks, especially. And I think that's really important, is to say, like, this is exactly how good allyship looks. It looks like how we're supporting each other and how we're showing up for you right now. And I think that's been really powerful. And I'm really, really proud of our ability to do that together and to have that kind of established, and it has established the trust, right? I can't ask Shantae to teach me stuff unless she's seen that I will do all the work I can to teach myself some stuff first. And once I've sort of reached the limit of my brain, because there is a limit to it, because I only have a white experience, right? And so there's always going to be a limit to my ability to understand without help. But once I've exhausted all of that and I've put my own energy and my own investment and I've like made it really clear that I will do the work on my own, and then I get to my limit, she says, okay, I trust you. You've done the work. And it's like, now I want to help educate you. Now I want to give my energy to bring you even closer to what an ideal ally would look like. So yeah. It's I am honored to have earned that trust and respect, but you got to earn it before you ask for anything. And so that's really how we've shown up. And I'm proud of the way that we've done that for each other. And she's done all of that for me, for queer work, right? Like she has demonstrated herself as a hardworking ally. And so I will never resent any kind of help, support, education, or anything I can give her, because I know she's doing the work.
Yeah. In terms of working, and I'm going to insert a little more backtracking and then bring it back forward. In terms of helping the teams that you lead, so not only from the Darkest Horse, but as you mentioned, you were working with a corporate group. Has there been resistance? Or when there is, how do you use your teamwork, your experiences to say, no, here's where I need you to be?
There's been tons of resistance. Radha would probably, honestly, I think you're going to hear this. Radha can speak to this better because she's a white woman, where people who are white might be more comfortable expressing that, even in private or whatever, whereas they won't probably have the guts to say it to me right now. But there's been so many forms of resistance. Radha, I would love for you to answer that question.
Cool. Yes. So I think that for the most part, the folks that we're interacting with are at least aware enough of the context that they're like, okay, I need to do something different. Right. Okay. And so there's at least a little bit of that, like, acceptance of responsibility and accountability. However, I will say that the most, recommending to anyone, especially our white listeners or viewers, the book White Fragility. It's a great place to start. And I think there's a lot of folks who, are centering, like, it's totally reasonable for white people to also be experiencing grief, right? To also be experiencing fear. Like, Black people don't have the monopoly on that. But the issue is when white people begin to center their grief, right? And to center their needs in this moment. And like, it's like just not the right time for that right now. And I think that like the version of resistance that I've heard is, I can think of a specific friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, who, somebody on the internet referred to her as a Karen, right? Which is, this like shorthand slang term for a white woman who is privileged and like, might call the cops on a Black person for looking at birds, right? And that she resented that, right? Because she's like, you're stereotyping me in a similar way that we're talking about folks doing to Black people. That's not right. I'm not a Karen. That's not me, and that's not fair. And correct. Reversing it is not better. And I completely agree with that. The thing is that recognizing there's just such a chasm between that sort of like desire and ask for compassion and a recognition of the contextual circumstances of hundreds and hundreds of years of oppression, that it's I think that's where the gap and resistance shows up the most, is the like, what about me moment, which, I don't refuse anyone their own, that everyone deserves compassion. But I think that part of this work is saying yes, and let me take a step back for a moment and look at the broader, like the scale of the thing, and what the actual implications of privilege are, and what the actual like limitations of my ability to accrue wealth, right? And to be safe and to not fear for my life. And, like to really take stock of like what the scale of the thing is, and sort of say, yeah, you can feel that fear, you can feel that resentment, but don't let that stop you from the bigger picture here. And I think that's where the biggest place that I'm seeing resistance is a little bit of that, like, what about me?
Can I also add in here too? One of the things I've been feeling and seeing on in terms of like we talk a lot about microaggressions, right? It's something that it's usually a small little thing that like we describe as a paper cut. And when you rub a little alcohol on it, it really hurts. And a lot of those little paper cuts can turn into, an abscess or a wound. And so a microaggression, could be as simple as somebody saying, for example, well, why would we defund the police? Why are people looting and ruining their neighborhoods? Why should I care? They took it to this next level, or, yeah, but all lives matter. Those are, to me, those are microaggressions, and those are also forms of resistance. So we often talk a lot about counterbalancing those microaggressions with micro resistance ourselves, and saying things like, or excuse me, yeah, where we try to counterbalance those things and say something like, all right, that's true, but here are the pieces that you need to understand. So ready to have some factual information, and not that I'm going to be able to always do that, or Rada's going to be able to always do that, but there's ways that young people who, for those who are listening, who feel like, I'm a teenager, I'm a youth, nobody's listening to me. Yes, they will have those things ready to go. Educate yourself. There's going to be people in your family who are going to say things, and part of the resistance to that is to catch it in action and actually call it out, because so that people acknowledge it, that they did a microaggression, and that they can have a chance to change and pivot. Every little that 180 degree requires lots of little turns of change, and so it's, when we're thinking about this behavioral change that's happening here of ourselves and in our systems, that's what it takes is micro forms of resistance, and that's going to be more sustainable versus getting out here every single day and screaming at the top of your lungs, because that wears you out. So I think that, if I have any kind of message to anybody who's listening, especially young people, you have the power to use micro resistance in the times where you see the micro and even macro aggression times.
And I want to throw just one more thing in there, which is that, I don't want it to sound like this should be easy. Right. Like, and I recognize that, like, what we're asking for, and, especially the last thing that I said about, like, maybe it's not about you right now. Like, that is hard. Right. And that everything that matters is scary on some level, right? Big stuff, big, important stuff is scary. And I absolutely want to make space for recognition of fear of change, right? And fear of doing it wrong, right? And saying something wrong and hurting someone even more because you just don't know, and things like that. And like those are all very normal, natural things to be like in the system. And I want to like say to anyone listening who is feeling, constrained by that fear, and just say, like, you're forgiven, it's okay. You are afraid, and that's part of it. And what else is here, right? Like, what else can we do? What would you do if you didn't have to be perfect? And maybe there's some space there to step into it a little bit. And if you step on someone's foot and you say, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, I'm trying, I'm sorry, great. Like that's part of the process. And I would be lying if I said that I have not done that at all, ever, and including in the last few weeks. I've in the last few weeks, there have been a couple of times that I was like, oh, that was a dumb thing for me. I thought I was being helpful, and I said something stupid. And I, sent a follow-up text and said, hey, I'm really sorry about that thing that I said. And the response I got was, thank you for that accountability, right? Like, because that's what you do. And I think that I'm not going to pretend like it's easy and like it's not scary, but I am going to say that you have to do it anyway.
Something I just want to kind of synthesize that I think is so important for a lot of our listeners, because some of them are students, some of them are educators, some of them are in the corporate space and beyond, and in all sorts of networks. I really like how kind of in the beginning of the conversation, we touched on this work can be grassroots, this work can be leaders. And those micro resistance, the micro activism, the making changes on a personal level, whether it's grassroots or leadership, will have a change organizationally from what I'm hearing. And I think that's just something that I really like the way that you all frame that, in understanding that there are small things, the micro part of it makes a major, major, major difference when it's all kind of put together. So just thank you for that visual. Thank you for that framework. I think it's really kind of transformational for our thinking and for our viewers. I would love to end by just hearing kind of what's next for the Dark Horse. What is, some resources for people to look out for, or how to learn more about your work, just ending it on ways that we can continue learning from both of you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Can I actually, even before, I know I keep like not answering your question directly, but even before we do that, knowing that we probably have listening, I would love to, and maybe this should be the last thing, but I'm saying it now because I'm excited. Use technology, use science, take like, if you are into tech, if you are into science, if you're into engineering, there are ways to be using those superpowers for good, right? Technology is an amazing, amazing tool, has amazing capacity to be changing how we live, how we interact, what equity looks like, what accessibility looks like. Like, it is the reason that we are obsessed with emerging technology, is that it is a key to success here. And there are ways to be developing tools, products, anything that you're working on. There's a way to stop and think, what would this look like for blank kind of person, right? What does this look like for someone who only has use of one arm? What does this look like for someone with dark skin? What does this look like for a little person, right? Like, there's so many, when you're working with technology, there's so many implications for how a person who might not look, feel, talk, sound, think like you would interact with it. And just that question, that exercise of saying, like, what part of this is built for me and what part of this could be built for someone else, is so powerful. And like, that's my like call to action for you, anyone who's watching and listening to this, is like, there are opportunities, there are a million little opportunities for you to say, what would it look like if I looked at this through an accessibility lens? What would this look like if I wanted to make blank kind of person feel like they belong using this technology? And sometimes it's really easy. Sometimes it's not hard to say, like, oh, I could just make this, so you don't need two arms, right? Like, I can do that. That's actually not hard. And so it doesn't always have to be hard work. It can actually just be little decisions that you make every day. Just wanted to say that. I got excited.
That's a great point, Rod. I wanted to say something too. I used to work with the Science Museum of Minnesota. Shout out to the Kitty Anderson Youth Science Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. They are the bomb, smart kids. Helped out with some curriculum over there. And one of the things I would say is that, this is a lifelong journey and commitment, right? And it's not enough to say, I will deal with all of that once I get a job. Because when the time comes for you to have that job, and for when the pivotal time comes in history, you won't have enough muscle memory there to do the thing. So this starts young. This starts now. I mean, I started volunteering and getting into activism as a middle school student. Nobody told me I had to do it. I stumbled. I didn't do it perfectly, but I was obsessed with learning. I was obsessed with justice. I was obsessed with others. And I think if you're a young person out there, you might think, I don't have any money, I don't have any this, but you have enough, power and willpower right now to listen to this, then that means you have privilege, and you should find a way to use it. And I think I would challenge everyone to ask themselves, what's my power? What's my privilege? Those who don't think that they have one, like I said, that perceived thing that you believe is keeping you back is likely one of your superpowers. It's like being a superhero, right? Like in Marvel. What is that thing? Find it, hold on to it, write it down. You don't probably have one, you have many. So that's my message to the youth, the educators, and the professionals that are helping them get there. It takes a village, but it takes a long time. This is definitely a game of chess and not checkers.
Thank you both
Right
for those messages. I think that's, again, really drive home this full conversation. And I feel inspired now, so I'm ready to kind of get to work on my next step.
Yay.
But I would love to just kind of circle back, because I do want to make sure our viewers hear how to continue listening and learning to the both of you and your work.
Yes. So here's a list. First, we put a lot of content on Instagram,
Okay.
and that includes, lately we've been sharing a lot of resources. And so you could follow all three of our accounts. The Darkest Horse is at TDHcast, so TDHCAST. Mine is at RADA, RADA _WHY. And Shantae's is at Namaste Shantae. So it's NAMASTECHANTE.
And for our viewers listening, we will type those in to
Great.
the comments as well.
Good.
I'll get
Good. So Instagram is a great way. LinkedIn, find the Darkest Horse Ventures on LinkedIn. Subscribe and listen to our podcast. Lots and lots and lots of good content there. You can subscribe to our newsletter if you go to our website, which is thedarkesthorse.com. And last, I will say that you can email us at hello@thedarkesthorse.com. And we would love to get any kind of message, any questions, if you're like, I want to get involved, I want to be on your podcast, I want to help produce your podcast, I want to, whatever it is, we're into it, because we love kind of bringing in as much of the community as we can.
Excellent. So to our viewers that are out there, again, we will post ways to access both Radha and Shantae to continue listening and learning, and continue to do this work in whatever field that you are in. To the two of you, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Again, this was a great way to spend the afternoon, listening, learning, hearing, and thinking about what action steps come next, both for our organization and for continuing to partner with you all. And so I just want to end it if there's any last things that you all would like to share, and then we'll cut off from there.
No, thank you so much. Black Lives Matter.
Yes, Black Lives Matter. Keep saying all their names.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.